Hey guys, I hope you have had a great start in 2018. It's already been more than half a year since the start of this podcast, and I hope this show has helped you to get started on your own journey to Chinese fluency. I hope by now you have found some interesting patterns to how our past guests reached fluency in Chinese. For instance, almost all our past guests studied very hard at the beginning to pass the beginner's level before doing further immersive studies. Now that is the recipe to learn Chinese successfully. So today I am super excited that I have two announcements to make. Announcement number one, I have decided to offer one-on-one tutoring to those of you that need help in learning Chinese. I can help you with pronunciation, both the standard Mandarin or if you prefer some Beijing dialect. I will teach you how native speakers talk, which is a lot different to textbooks, unfortunately. I'll keep you accountable and you have access to ask me questions every day on WeChat. Because this is one-on-one tutoring, I can only accept a very limited number of people. So you can now register your interest at chinesetalkis.com/tutoring. Now I have a second announcement to make. Well, I'm super excited about this one. I'll be in China in late April this year, which is 2018. And I'll be organizing a Chinese immersion and photography trip. If you are listening, you are invited. I'll arrange the travel route, the transport, the local tour guide, and accommodation. So basically everything will be taken care of. All you need is to come and practice your Chinese while exploring China with me. As some of you may know that I am an award-winning wedding photographer, I'll make this trip even more fun by teaching you photography, so that by the end of the trip, not only will you speak better Chinese, you'll also become a better photographer and bring back lots of beautiful photos. You can register your interest at chinesetalkis.com/trip. Without further ado, let's start the show. This is Journey to Chinese Fluency Podcast, episode number 29.
Embarrassing moment, culture insights, proven methods to achieve Chinese fluency. Skip that learning curve with the Journey to Chinese Fluency Podcast. Now, your host, Victor Yang.
Hello everyone, Victor Yang here and welcome to Journey to Chinese Fluency. Today I'm joined by Vladimir Djurovic. His Chinese name is Zhu. Vladimir comes from France. He speaks French and Serbian natively, where Serbian is his mother tongue. Apart from speaking fluent French, Serbian, English and Chinese, he also speaks Russian. Vladimir has lived in Shanghai for the last 16 years. He is the founder and CEO of Labbrand, a leading global brand consultancy originated and headquartered in China. And here's one interesting fact about Vladimir. He named some famous brands in Chinese, including LinkedIn, which is 领英, Marvel, 漫威, Booking.com, 宾客, and Airbnb, 爱彼迎. That's very, very impressive. Well, let's welcome our guest. 你好, Vladimir. Welcome to the show.
你好, Victor. 谢谢你请我过来. Thanks for inviting me on this show.
Are you ready to share with us your journey to Chinese fluency?
Yes, Victor. I'd be glad to tell you more about that.
So first of all, please feel free to tell us a bit more about your background, how you started learning Chinese.
Well, it was pretty random, actually. I didn't really plan. I actually took the decision to learn Chinese in one day, actually. I was offered the chance to choose a third language. I was already studying English and Russian, actually. And that was an opportunity to start a third language at the entrance of the university. And I was hesitating between Spanish and Chinese, and ultimately I felt like, I had to try to challenge myself. So, and then I kind of went to venture into Chinese, which was really a challenge. The school teacher was saying, like, you should not combine Russian and Chinese. That's really too hard. But that finished kind of convincing me that I should do that. So I went for that. That was in 98. So in 99, I did the first visit to Shanghai. I studied in the summer for 3 weeks in Jiaotong University. I came back in 2000 for the same program. And in 2001, actually, I moved to Shanghai. And I started studying at Jiaotong University for a master degree. So I continued studying Chinese along a master degree. So actually, I just landed in China, and I was at the level of master degree students. And I was only with 3 years of learning Chinese as a foreign language in France. So it was really a big gap. But I was lucky to be accepted, and I was really having like 3 fantastic years in Shanghai, mixed with studying together with Chinese students.
Wow, that's very interesting. So when you chose to learn Chinese, you were already learning Russian at the time.
Yes, absolutely. So they tried to discourage me, but I felt like it was a good choice. Actually, they were not probably totally wrong, because my Russian became quite rusty with time. Actually, I think my Chinese eat up, my Russian, and so it's indeed too very. It was a choice, but I don't regret it actually at all. Since that time at the university, the highlight was to actually graduate from a master in Toyota in management science and engineering. It's 管理科学与工程. So it's 硕士生. This is something that I basically had to defend my thesis in Chinese. I had a lot of fun. Actually, the biggest challenge was most of the exam were like open book, but one was like closed book. So that was really the biggest challenge, because for the other one, I could always refer, and if I forgot a character, I could kind of dig it up from the book or some material. But some are really like that exam that was like closed book was really like a challenge, but it all went through.
So did you do your university in China?
Yeah, correct. I mean, it was in Shanghai. Yeah.
Right. So that was in Jiaotong University, was it?
Yeah, exactly.
Wow. And you did all your thesis in Chinese.
Yeah, I had to defend it in Chinese. So I had to prepare a document that was 100-page in Chinese, and then summarize it and go in front of a jury to pass my master degree, basically, defense. And so after that, actually, for a while, I didn't study Chinese. I was just living in China. My wife is Chinese, so we also practice basically Chinese. And I speak Chinese with her most of the time. We also speak English, but then 3 years ago, I started to study Chinese again, but this time as a Chinese class in my company. So I created a small class with a few of my younger colleagues that either are American-born Chinese or some other foreigners that have been living in China for a while. And basically we study twice a week, 1.5 hours, reading, articles or trends on China and debating around it.
So you started learning Chinese in high school. And after that, did you go straight to Shanghai Jiaotong University, or did you go to another university before you go to Shanghai to do the master degree?
Yeah, actually, just for, I am not a language student. I'm an engineer. So really these languages were on the side. So I studied actually Chinese pretty late. I was already at the university, not really at the high school. It was really I was in my engineering school. So I picked it up pretty late. I only studied it in France as a third language for 3 years. And then I basically landed in Shanghai for a master degree. It was an exchange program from my university in France and China, and I just decided to start this again.
Ah, I see. So basically, the first few years when you studied Chinese in France, that basically helped you to build a foundation in Chinese before you travel to Shanghai to study the master degree and doing further study in Chinese.
Yes, absolutely. That was like what inspired me to do that, and give me like very, very rough basis. But because a lot was to be learned. There is such a huge gap between what is required for following a university class in China and the level you can get after 3 years of learning. So it was really like a very steep jump. Actually, I tried at that time to pass the Chinese exam for language. I mean, at that time, the level that was required to enter university, I think I only got it when I finished my master graduation. It took me 3 years to get really to the level I should really have in Chinese to even enter the university. But I think that was part of the exchange program at that time. They allowed a little bit of gap. And I was lucky to be given some so, they cut some slack for me and, allow me to tag into the class. But then, language was a challenge. I am quite tall, like a bamboo, actually, like my family name in Chinese. It's called Zhu. It's like that. I mean, so I was also like, the class was, the seats were also quite small at that time. I mean, I had really an experience landing, and entering in the university back in the years that was in 2001.
Wow. Now please share with us your biggest motivation in learning Chinese. So you mentioned you studied Chinese because you had the choice. You had to make the decision between Chinese and Spanish. And you made the decision to study Chinese. And then you made the big move to actually move to China. You lived in China for 16 years. So what's been the biggest motivation?
As you said about motivation, the motivation started from the first encounter with my first Chinese lesson. It was actually a very special lesson. The teacher only wrote 5 characters on the blackboard, and she didn't basically help us pronounce it or read it. She told us that actually, if we try, we could read it and we could understand the meaning. We could guess it. So basically the 5 characters, I still remember it now. It was 我说中国话. I still remember that she told us to look at zhong first. Actually, she probably guided us to go into looking at this zhong and saying like, okay, if you see a shape like that is a square, and if you see a line going through it in the middle, what could it mean? Of course, we come up with middle at some point, and then we look at the next character that is also square but having a shape inside that is like almost like a fence around something, and this something, we learned that it's a jade with this character that is actually, we will get some help that it means the king, that's the Wang, and something shining out of it, because the king is the one that has the jade, on its belt. So we got like, okay, that's the empire, because it's a fence around the king and the shiny, attribute that he has. So we basically come like, okay, that's the Middle Kingdom. Okay, that's China's, and then the last character we saw that there is some aspect of the, like something that looks like a tongue, and then it's Hua, and that becomes Chinese, and so on and so on. So basically, she gave us this passion of decoding characters from the written aspect.
Yes.
And we followed a quite actually special method in learning that was very much based on actually learning the character in the written and how they are shaped, bit part by parts. I mean, and a bit of the history of the evolution of the character. So it's actually a kind of a method that is a bit different from most of the methods that I know have been learned by other foreigners. Sometimes that study Chinese in a more maybe learning the character or learning to speak about it. So Yeah, I think that created a passion. Actually, it was such a big passion for me that during these first months when I studied Chinese, I was listening so much to the tape linked with the book and the textbook that actually I was sharing a room with a roommate. My roommate decided to move away because I was studying too much Chinese. I was trying to pronounce it and reading it. So that was like a funny fact that I lost one roommate at that time, just to escape from me being, so pushy about learning Chinese.
Right. That's definitely a very good first lesson that introduced you into Chinese.
Mm-hmm.
Your Chinese teacher has done a really, really good job.
Absolutely.
Yeah, if there's any listeners that, if you are listening to this podcast and you are a Chinese teacher, definitely consider having that in your first lesson to your students. You may get your student hooked for life.
Yes, I think that definitely hooked me for life. Actually, it totally changed the trajectory of what I was planning to do because I really become passionate about Chinese. I mean, to the fact that even though I was studying engineering and having a background in banking, I mean, I decided to come in China where I could not find a job with my background, and basically it forced me to actually reinvent and learn new skills and think about new ways. So yeah, I think this was really, really something very inspiring, and I think maybe some teachers can consider to add a little bit more of that type of games for their students.
Yes. Well, during your study of Chinese, have you ever lost motivation?
I think I think it's still challenging. I mean, for me, what still motivates me is that it feels like something that is very hard to grasp and really master totally. It's always something that to some level, you will say, okay, I want to learn to really understand how maybe an official will talk, and so that you can understand some official way of language, or like the TV anchor for the news, they will use a certain type of language, or so varying the different type of language, being able to cope with all the new Chinese terms or words that are appearing. So I think it's an ongoing challenge. I mean, basically, I've been living in China for Shanghai for 16 years, still, catching up with my learning again recently, and I feel like. No, actually, the beauty is that you always have to discover and to dig out something. There's always an interesting story hidden behind a character. So it's really, really something that I keep as a little precious space. On a rainy and cold day in Shanghai, like on the winter, I mean, having a little bit of pleasure with words is always something very nice.
Right. So basically, characters, I guess, is one of your biggest motivation.
I think so. I think I kept that. It went into other areas. I mean, of beyond language, because I also study a lot some science called semiotics, like Fu Hao Xue, which is about the way you can generate meaning and stuff. So I mean, Chinese characters are just a way of a very fantastic language in that sense. But I think it's as you know, I mean, you already mentioned in my work. I mean, I come up to play. That created also a passion to engage with clients, to be the one they will trust to develop their Chinese name. So this is also like because of the love for the characters, the little subtleties that each can carry. So also being a foreigner doing that is interesting because I don't know everything. Everything is actually very, it's the right level of not knowing everything, but always being on the discovery mode that can create you actually even more motivation to explore. So, being maybe one motivation of Chinese is that we are always a bit incompetent to a certain level, at least for me. I mean, I have to speak humbly about me. I always feel a little bit incompetent. So it just moved me to kind of push me to discover and to learn more.
That's a fantastic point. Like always feel that you are not there yet. And then that always push you a little bit further and always challenge you to learn more. And maybe you can tell us a bit more about, how you come up with those Chinese names. To be honest, I'm very, very surprised to hear that a non-Chinese actually came up with those big names. Like that is very surprising. And those names sounds really, really nice and sounds really Chinese. I mean, a Chinese guy would have no problem accepting those Chinese names. And those names actually carry their meanings as well.
Yes, I think I started this the activity of naming in Chinese was always supported with a team of Chinese colleagues working with me, but I've been exposed very much to be also involved in the creative process, but also in presenting and debating the names with my client, finding a way to present them, because many of my clients, they don't speak Chinese neither. So I need to also, but in order to guarantee that the names that we come up with, so there's one thing that is going beyond language, because those names are very nice. Thanks for the appraisal, by the way. But they're actually, before being a nice name, they are actually trademarks that need to be registered. So it's a lot of our work is actually legal screening. We have to find new combinations of characters that are far enough from any other brand or any other trademark. So a lot of the challenge of finding a name actually is generating names and sorting them from a legal perspective first. Then actually we also need to, one thing that we work on, because if I was to choose a name, that works well for that I think is good, or a Shanghainese or Beijingese thing is great, it's enough to go to ask someone that speaks Cantonese, and they will maybe say, "Oh, this is horrible." I remember a project like that was for a name we had. We thought about a name called Morningtia, which is for a brand called Monnier that do tiles. Actually, not very famous brand, but Morningtia for Mandarin was perfect, but it means like model, peaceful home. But then if you go in South China, Mo means not, and Ningtia means not peaceful home. Imagine like you buy a tiles or a roof, and then it's a not peaceful home. So you have to be very careful about like finding. So part of our work is also checking in different dialects, so legal dialects, and then of course we also when we develop names, we also work with consumers, also try to see how they react. So it's actually more like. Of course, knowing Chinese is very important to find good combination, harmonious characters and working. But it's quite actually funny. I think that I have another colleague also from the States. Actually, she's from the States, but she studied in Taiwan, and she's also very able to grasp the characters and the combination that works into brand names, actually, because they're shorter. It's much easier, I think, to grasp Chinese names for brands than to learn Chinese, for example, I think, which require, much more effort. Yeah.
Awesome. That's very cool. That's very interesting to know. Like naming brands is not just about sounding right. There's also dialects. There's also all the legal aspect to it. Yeah, thanks for sharing with us. Well, now please share with us your method in learning Chinese. So what's been the most effective technique or method that's been working for you?
My first year of learning Chinese was about learning the most frequent 400 characters. And a lot of the memorization for me of them was through each of them knowing how they combine as much as possible with the previous one that I learned. So it was really like a progressive build-up on what I learn, I reuse with the new one, and I try to create as much as possible of new knowledge from the existing, and of course supported by reading, then pronunciation and writing. So it was really like a lot of kind of exercising, and repetition. And then extending to the first year was 400, the second was 900, and that was to reach a certain level. Now I think that's for the beginning to me intermediate. I think after a while, actually, what made me progress most was fast reading and yuedu, basically yuedu. I think that was like the methods. That's something that I was more exposed to when I arrived in China. In parallel of my master degree course, I was taking Chinese lesson courses in parallel, and there was much more like Korean or Japanese for kind of that are quite fast in reading characters. So it was actually quite good to match up with them. And I think trying to read up a text and increase the speed of reading is, I think, something that needs to be practiced, on text, by understand the context and stuff. And today actually is like, for me, because I maybe try to be enjoy the learning through also discovering the culture and stuff, is actually more to choose like interesting and up-to-date content. If this week actually the most famous content in China is about the Niandu Zongqie. It's kind of like the summary of your year. So we've seen a lot of apps doing some, music apps or Alipay, doing interesting kind of summaries of the profile that create a lot of buzz. So I basically had an interesting article about that phenomenon, and that was my support for my class. So today is kind of more like merging my interest for understanding the Chinese society and the novelty with learning.
That's very interesting. So you start with 400 characters, is it?
Yes, correct. 400,
right, 400
ranked on
characters.
Frequency of usage. They should cover, actually, if you take any text in China, they should cover about 70% of the characters that you find in the text. You still have a lot of gaps, but you can recognize a lot of the characters in the text.
I think a very good point you have raised is, in order to retain your memory, you have to keep using those. And you did that by trying to link the new characters you learned with the old characters you have already learned. So that way, once you have learned 400 characters, all the characters are somewhat linking with each other. I guess you were creating sentences or words that link those characters together so that you can memorize everything. Yes.
I think. Yeah, I'm not sure it's very famous in the Anglo-Saxon world, but it's a teacher in France is famous for this method. So he's called Joël Bellassène, and and for those that are interesting, it's Bellassen. So if you want to look for Bellassène methods, I think it's based on that. For me, it was so it's mostly in French methods, but I think they've been translated sometime in English. So you can look for that. I think for me that was really what both sustained the passion, but also I think created a very good system to learn Chinese.
That's awesome. Bellassène method. That's interesting. In terms of writing, so your strength is in reading and writing. And maybe you can share with us a bit more about how you memorize each characters, because, some people find it really difficult to memorize each character because it looks like a picture, You're trying to memorizing a picture at a time. That may be very difficult. So what's your method? How did you do it?
Well, I think the order of strikes, and there's a few rules that help you if you know that a few simple rules that applies for most of the writing. It helps you see the character in a much faster way instead of just seeing a picture, because actually just by looking at it, you know where, if you were to write it, you will start with which strike, and then you will go for the next one will be which one. So first you can picture how it is, how you will basically write it. So that makes it much more familiar, like a friend, because that you know how to shape it. And then basically you will definitely go into splitting these different parts that are having different meanings. Sometimes also trying to find out the hidden story behind, the story behind the why these two parts are together. Sometimes I will ask my teacher, but why is that meaning that? Because these two little parts have nothing to do with this. So then if you think about it, you may find an interesting story or kind of a deeper truth maybe about Chinese mind, that has been, or culture that is behind the characters. So I think this is also the exploration of finding out basically through the characters how the culture that was actually the underlying culture, how did it work to create those characters.
That's a great set of methods to learn how to write Chinese characters. So you mentioned there's basically you learn Chinese characters by learning the stroke order, and by memorizing the order of strokes. That also helps you to memorize the character itself rather than it's an image anymore. Now you have the order of how to draw this image, really. And then the second thing is you break up each character into radicals, and you can also find out the meaning behind each radical, and which contributes to the overall meaning of the character. And you can also find out associated hidden meanings and interesting stories. And using that, you can also learn the Chinese culture. I think that's a fantastic set of methods to learn how to write and read. So what has been your biggest challenge in learning Chinese, and how did you overcome it?
I think for me was really sensing the tones. And it's more about, I felt that either it has to be natural, but kind of learning it and being able to know it, to identify it was very hard as a method. So somehow the fluency come more from practice or habit, but it's not something that I really had a clue how to really, control the learning, because I felt it will be impossible to memorize for each character which tone it is and to know it, like as an additional token. It has to be embedded in some form of like seamlessness. So that was actually quite a challenge. I had some fun, I think, trying one semester of learning Shanghainese. And here there was even more tones, so it was 6 or 7 tones. So somehow it made the Mandarin actually look a bit simpler afterwards. But then so that's maybe one method. Or you can try Cantonese as well. I know I haven't learned Cantonese, but I think I also know that there are more tones there. So I think this musicality, I think, is still a challenge. And if you're slightly tired or lacking of energy, you can easily kind of lose the tones in your conversation. So I think this is still kind of a challenge sometimes.
I agree with you. I guess you can't really learn the Chinese tones by just every single character. It's better to place it in a context, in a conversation that, for example, in a sentence or in a phrase where you repeat it all the time, then you get a feel for it. And when you say it, you get it right. Otherwise, it's really difficult to be thinking about, which tone is it when you say one single character at a time. That not only slows you down, but also make it difficult for you to memorize how to pronounce things.
Yes.
Great. If you are to start learning Chinese from scratch all over again, how would you do it?
I don't know if I would change much, actually. I think the only thing I would like to start learning it even younger. I think that's the only thing.
Right.
If I had to start it again today, I think I would probably have to make it more conversational, more in the context and use simpler methods. I think the method I used was still quite demanding in terms of investment and time, but it enables to go faster into reading. I mean, I feel like getting into the written language and having a passion for it is such a big motivator. But in another way, also, I think one thing that will make it easier even to start Chinese now is my understanding that somehow I feel it's a bit paradox. But in a way, it's a paradox that Chinese also feels to me like a very simple language now, And that's actually every Chinese on the street will say, "Well, Chinese is the simplest language, of course." But then, once you learn it, it seems that the grammar is indeed very simple. If I had to learn Russian again, I would be even more troubled because Russian has such a complex grammar. And grammars feels like almost impossible to learn if you don't learn the rules. In Chinese, I feel like the grammar, you don't need to think too much about it. It's a lot about the habit of practicing it. I think immersion into Chinese, talking to it could be even like faster than going from a textbook when I started in France, a bit far away from the immersive environment. So immersive environment could be a way that I will prioritize today, because I feel Chinese is a pretty kind of natural language to learn by talking and interacting.
Yes. Great sharing. So now please share with us an embarrassing or funny moment when you were learning Chinese.
When we were talking about the names, I mean, I and my company, we come up with a name for Airbnb recently that is iBeing. And it was at the beginning of the year, and actually it created kind of a lot of a strong social media kind of reaction. So that actually that's quite embarrassing because we just completed our work through legal screening and everything. So the linguistic check, we checked with a lot of consumers. So we knew that the name was actually good, but we didn't. It's very hard to also react when there's a lot of kind of talks around the meaning of the name, because inside you have love and meeting each other. The meaning of the name is like greet each other with love. So in the context of renting an apartment, a home, it can create a lot of association or funny jokes. That was kind of like a bit of embarrassing because we felt like really on the scrutiny of the whole almost nation, because of but on the other side, actually, it was quite interesting because one of our intent with this name was to create something new in the culture in a way that it's very hard to associate renting a home with the notion of love or sharing, and actually in the philosophy of Airbnb, it's actually a very strong concept of, it's not only about being a cheap solution, but it's about a totally new way of life, or kind of, really engaging every host and every guest into a form of exchange. So I think it was more like a cultural shock, a wave that was a reaction. And in a way that we have embedded this character now in the culture, I feel it's actually good for the future. So in a way it was embarrassing, but I feel also it's very interesting and I'm quite proud of it. And I'm looking forward to see how it will grow in the Chinese society.
Awesome. Personally, I like that name, and I really like how you have incorporated the vision of the company into that name, while you also kept the pronunciation of the name. So I think you have done a really great job on that. I mean, like, people can always make up jokes about any names, pretty much, any name, if they want to, they can make up jokes about it. So I wouldn't worry too much about that. And apart from that, you have gained a lot of publicity on that name. You've won people, talking about it. So I don't think it's a bad thing.
I agree with you.
Yeah. So now please share with us a success story, a most rewarding moment after you have become fluent in Chinese.
Recently I picked up these lessons and in the last 3 years, and I think very recently the fruit of this learning come into, I was basically able to conduct a 1 hour pitch with a client, basically convincing them about a totally new product and a service that I wanted to do. And it was a totally Chinese environment. So there is always difficulties to engage, and because you need to. It's a very, very thorough exercise to engage an audience that is Chinese in a non-expert actually, and you need to be pedagogical. You need to bring everything together: your personality, your passion, and everything, and being able to do it in a professional context by the rules. Was something that actually I was struggling to do until now. So it took me 15 or 16 years of living in China and maybe almost 20 years of learning to reach that level. But that was actually extremely, extremely rewarding because it seems like almost impossible to do. And then one day it comes and you just do it and you can do it. So I was like having a very... I was not nervous before the meeting because I was really passionate about what I was going to present. And then I was like feeling that I was more fluent than what I could imagine I could be, some way. So it was unprepared. It was natural. I knew the content, but it was like really a moment like rewarded actually the reconnection of all with the Chinese language recently. Another one that is more like I created a text in Chinese for the wedding of one of my best friends, and I was basically all the other friends were speaking in French, and but I was able to address. He was marrying with a Chinese lady, so I was like. I was happy to actually be able to tell more about him in Chinese on his behalf. I think It was also nice to be this bridge, between culture, because I was trying to reveal and connect who he is, and also be a way to connect with all his family-in-law. So. So that's just two occasions that come to mind, and doing that is really like a great reward for all these years of learning.
Yeah, definitely very rewarding to benefit from the fruit of all the hard work and learning throughout 16 years. Definitely very rewarding. How would you compare your life before you've learned Chinese and your life after you have learned Chinese?
Yeah, I think it's a awakening. Learning is all about awakening, but actually learning, as I learned Chinese, only when I started learning when I was, I think about 20 years old. I started learning it. So I think for me it was actually a new, really opening a new space, Chinese language and Chinese culture. Discovering it through the language is helping to love the culture, love the country. And in a way, for me, it's a journey of a Westerner that didn't know much about intercultural things. In a way, I already have bicultural with my family that is Serbian, living in France. So I was exposed to biculture, but nothing as rewarding and as part of new learnings and amazement than learning Chinese. Learning Chinese totally changed my trajectory of life, from going to live in France to live in China. It inspired my job because I'm working with Chinese almost daily, with creating names and working on that. So for me, it was a very big encounter that inspired my professional life, my way of a form of philosophy of how you look at life. Often we just say that Chinese culture is very long and very deep, but when you start to really feel what this could mean, it's something very interesting to really understand.
Great. So now please share with us one special thing about the Chinese culture that is different to your own culture.
About 2 years after living in China, and I come to discover one fact that for Chinese people, like when you see a foreigner eating with a fork, is something that looks quite primitive, because a fork is something that has that is quite sharp, that is quite it's almost like a weapon, so it's something almost you're going for gaming when you eat your food with something or with a knife. Whereas like Chinese culture, using chopsticks, it looks something much more about moving things and displacing. It's much more delicate. So it's just, what I would say, it's just a way of framework. Sometimes you just to realize, wow, actually, it's not so much about how I see the Chinese culture, but just I can imagine like the mirror kind of how Chinese will look from the Chinese culture perspective, how some of the things that we in Western culture, we just feel like we take for granted could be actually quite shocking. Like actually Chinese eating with tools and the Chinese cuisine and the rituals around sharing a meal. Maybe, you can just consider it's like a travel in the future by looking at the way Chinese eat with chopsticks. It's just like this type of cultural kind of understanding that there is a kind of different type of maturation and there's kind of different perspective on one single thing.
Yes. Is there a tool, an app, or a website that you cannot live without in learning Chinese?
I think Pleco is very useful now. I think the lookup function in WeChat is also very very useful.
Yep.
So I think those two are very handy.
Pleco and WeChat, definitely great apps. So if you are to recommend to our listeners only one book in learning Chinese or the Chinese culture, what would that be?
I think for learning Chinese, I think I will go for the Belasen method. I think so actually I was looking at it and I retrieved there's one book in English that's actually the same method that I followed. It's called A Key to Chinese Speech and Writing by Joël Belasen and John Peng. Yeah, so I think you can, that would be my recommendation. For Chinese culture and history, I really like another book that is called On China, but I don't know, that makes two books. But On China by Kissinger is a remarkable book, both for culture and politics, actually. But I really found it fascinating. It's written by a foreigner. It's a foreigner that had the chance to meet and Mao Zedong at the reopening of China in the 60s and 60s, 70s, and he was really early in this process, and he has to learn a lot about Chinese culture and diplomacy and the context. So the way in this book he explains the building of China, starting already from thousands of years, ago, until now, and actually it can really help to understand the Chinese mindset. And I was actually very surprised that this book was actually also translated in Chinese, because it's a book that is actually really from an American politician point of view. And but what he disclosed about Chinese culture is, I think, very beautiful and very interesting. And so I think, surprisingly enough, to find in a book that talks about politics and geopolitics, but it's a very original way to enter into Chinese culture. So that's one book I will strongly recommend for the audience.
Yes, definitely a great book to check out by Henry Kissinger. His Chinese name is Ji Xingge. This name is very, very famous in China. This book on China in Chinese is called 论中国, which literally translates to talking about China. I'll link those two books in our show note. Now this is your chance to teach our listeners your favorite Chinese quote, phrase, or expression.
Yeah, I will maybe go a bit on the side of your usual rules, because it will not be a long phrase, it will be a word. I was just talking about the most common word. I mean, that you may see in Chinese, the word that say yes or to be, the character 是.
Yeah.
So for this character, what is very interesting for me is that when I learned it, my teacher told me a story, and it's a story that is about, you have to imagine, how can you write a concept that means to be? It seems very, if you had to create the character today, how will you do that? I mean, how do you represent something so big and so abstract? So actually, when you look at the Chinese character, you can recognize on the top there is the sun. It's a square with a horizontal line in the middle. So that's the sun. And you will see a line that separates the sun from what you can see on the left down part, a man kind of walking, but stuck with something in front of him that I interpret like an obstacle. And in a way, you can try to read this story as a story like a man walking, meeting an obstacle. And basically, that's probably all of us encounter that. And you start to be only when you can see beyond that obstacle and see the light coming from the sun. This story really enabled me to memorize the character. This character, I could write it anytime, anywhere. But I felt it's quite a strong story, and also tells a lot about Chinese culture. I'm not even sure this is a real story. Some other characters I'm even more sure, but if it's not a true story, I think it could become one. So
yeah, that's awesome. That's like very, very interesting. This is actually the first time I have heard about this. That really explains the character really well, and I think this is also a great way to memorize that character. To our listeners, like if you really look at this character, 是, right? The Chinese word for is or to be. I'm sure if you hear that story, now you can memorize that without any problem.
Yeah, I think so. So you can practice and see if you can write it now.
I like that quote, although it's not really a quote, but this is great. Now, Vladimir, if you are to give our listeners one single piece of a parting advice in learning Chinese, what would that be?
Yeah, I think it's just to love the characters. That would be my single phrase. Learn to love the characters.
Learn to love the characters.
Yes.
That's a very great advice. Now, just before we let you go, Vladimir, how can our listeners reach you?
Oh, actually, they could reach me quite easily if they go on my company website. I mean, that's very easy to reach me.
Sure.
I don't know if that's allowed in the program. Maybe we do a post here. I don't know, but I think I don't want to make publicity, but I think this is definitely something. The easiest way is to write at Shanghai@Labbrand.com. I will receive all your messages. My name is pretty hard to read, but otherwise you just can write on Shanghai@Labbrand. Labbrand is Labbrand, like the lab for brand, .com. And yeah, I think I receive all your messages, and I'll be really happy to respond and give you my personal contacts and so on, and we can keep contact. I'll be really happy to engage with with all of you that are passionate about Chinese.
Awesome! I'll definitely link that in our show notes.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Vladimir, today for sharing with our listeners your journey in learning Chinese. It's just a fantastic journey you had, especially in terms of, doing your business in China and, naming all these super famous businesses. That's just very impressive. And the way you shared about writing Chinese characters, that's very unique in our show. So thank you so much.
Thanks, Victor. I'm really happy of this occasion, and I look forward to share more in the future with the audience. Enjoy.
To our listeners, the show note is now available at ChineseTalkEase.com/29. TalkEase is spelled as TALKEZE. This podcast is created for you. I'd love to hear your feedback of this show, both good and bad. I'd also like to hear about your biggest problem in learning Chinese, so that maybe I can help you to overcome it. You can do so by visiting ChineseTalkEase.com/feedback. Want to expand your vocabulary? Find me on Instagram at ChineseTalkEase, where I teach one Chinese word a day. You can also join us on Facebook. Just go to talkchinesecommunity.com. That's it for now. I will see you in the next episode.